Howdy, folks. Welcome to Wonkatonkwa County. If I can get your attention over here. I know some of you are feeling mighty confused. Whatever spell they put on folks when they ride the number 9, it leaves you feeling groggy, like somebody whacked you over the head. And it leaves a hole in a person's memory. Usually, folks lose about 10 to 14 months when they come here. The feeling it'll go away. I fear that the memory loss may not. And no, ma'am, you aren't watching a strange puppet show. I am, in fact, a talking human skull. And you definitely ain't in Kansas no more. See, in Wonkatonkwa County, magic, hoodoo, Santeria, they all work. The priests can heal the sick by praying. The dead walk at night. And all them monsters your folks used to scare you with really might be out there somewhere in the woods or under the bed. And to put not too fine a point on it, it ain't safe to be out after dark. The dead that walk the desert, they're hungry for your vigor. Which is why Deputy Marston and I were sent down here to greet you in the first place. And get you on aboard that there stagecoach, where we can whisk you off to the safety of Hodag Gulch, the largest of Wonkatonkwa County's towns. My name is, or was, Jeb Sorza, and I am at your service. I've taken the liberty of having all the major news stories of the last 2 years put into a book for you, so that you can catch yourself up on U.S. politics. We do consider ourselves part of the good state of Texas, round these parts. And, if you're feeling brave enough, there is a trail, protected by monsters and worse, that, if you ride at 200 miles, will take you back out to Presidio County. We even have a detachment of rangers, if that makes you feel better. Oh, I do apologize for the deputy, ma'am. He don't talk much. As a lawman, I'm afraid he's seen stuff that has left him a little dumb. But there ain't nobody who'll keep you safer than him except maybe the sheriff himself, who usually would be down here talking to you. Unfortunately, Sheriff Quimby is dealing with some bandits. I'm afraid that things that go bump in the night hasn't deterred some folks from becoming trouble themselves. In fact, lots of folks seem to think that they must be in hell here already, and so they decide that good and evil don't matter so much. But I ain't here to philosophize with you. Sir, dang it! Sir, get the hell away from that well! Pardon me, ma'am, I do not like to swear in front of the fair sex. Sir, you are in Wonkatonkwa Station. This here's a ghost town for a reason. According to the local Indians. And yes, we have a very strange couple of tribes around here. The train station's always been here. But folks, that is to say, white folks and Chinese and Negroes, they didn't start showing up here until 1848. And when they did, they started building a town around the station so they could greet newcomers, get the mail, and maybe build a prosperous community in the face of all the things up there. Unfortunately, something horrible creeped up into the well. And the mat moss it sweats out into the water. Sir, if you drink that, it will turn you into a monster yourself. Only the most desperate of fools drink the water from this here station. That's why the stagecoach. Although I might be nothing but jaw, ladies and gentlemen, I do know when I've jawed enough. Ma'am, if you'd be so kind as to set me in that there bird cage, I can fill you in and answer your questions as we go. But it's getting late, and if we don't start out soon, well, we might not be able to get home at all. Notice them freight agents are moving mighty quick and not helping us. Their sense of urgency should give you an idea of what's going on. Is that it? All right. Everyone's aboard, Mr. Neeson. Get us out of here. Double quick.
Welcome, partner, to Dead Man's Dice, a chronicle of the first campaign run in my own personal Undeadwood Weird West RPG, as well as a bit of a development log for the game. Here I'm going to tell you about the events of the campaign, tell you about the game and the setting, share some lore and some ideas with you, and hopefully bring my own bizarre fantasy world of Wonkatonkwa County to life. I'm Brian Rideout, host, author of Undeadwood, and the Soul Wrangler for this here campaign. Keep your gun handy, pray over your ammunition, and let's slap some leather. This here's episode 1, setting up the campaign. In this first episode, I intend to talk to you about how the campaign came about, and why it led me to create a whole new role-playing game. And then I'm going to talk about character generation and our first playtest. Now that the campaign is a few sessions in, I'll spend episode 2 catching you up on the story so far, with all of its murder, mayhem, monsters, and political maneuvering. I have a core gaming group of about 3 players, each of whom is an old friend or a relation of mine, someone I've known for a long time and trust. Due to a number of health issues, both mine and some of our players, it has been difficult to keep momentum on a campaign we'd been running for some years. It's played in Swords and Wizardry, which is a version of Dungeons & Dragons, based on the 1974 through 1977 rule set, with a few modern tweaks. It's a lot of fun and it's very light, and when we can enjoy it, we do. But as we were having issues with momentum, and I was going to be traveling this summer, I decided to try something a little different. I ran short, episodic games where it was easy for people to pop in and pop out, and in fact, designed the whole game around that very concept. It also gave me an opportunity to introduce these old players who I knew and cared about to some of the people I've come to know and care about in my D&D groups outside of this group. I'd invited a handful of people to come and go, and some of them took me up on the offer, and there was some great chemistry. And so, I wanted to bring some of those players in, get them to play with me regularly on Monday nights, at least for a little while until we were ready to rejoin our D&D campaign. And so I wrote a handful of pitches with ideas for campaigns. Now, I'm an inveterate rules hacker. I like homebrewing my own stuff, not just content, but right down to rewriting the mechanics of the game to suit me. And so, for some of the ideas I pitched to them, I was going to have to write a whole new role-playing game. One of those pitches I entitled Undeadwood. I gave a simple prompt that went like this.
Things are getting mighty strange down Hodag Gulch way. Stranger than usual, that is. Sure, folks arrive on the number 9 all the time, with just a bag of no memory of getting on the train or the last year of their lives. And yeah, Hoodoo and Santeria work in Hodag Gulch, but that's just been business as usual near as long as anyone can remember. No, what's been unusual has been the dead fellas trying to drain the life out of anyone who's out past the sheriff's hex marks after dark. The dead ain't usually so much trouble. And the natives down by the Rio Ojo have been terrified, saying a Navajo wolf is stalking their mesa. And them giant thunder lizards have been crazy lately. Hodag stampedes have destroyed a couple of ranch houses. And then there are the bandits up near Vulture Rock that have cut the whole of Wonkatonkwa County off from the rest of America. Of course, Hoopsnake Gold Mine is haunted now, too, and the damned miners are causing trouble getting liquored up all night. And then there's that unsettling prophecy that Jim Holden says the Jackalope gave him up at Lassiter Peak. But all those are nothing, mind you, compared to the phantom of Mark Neeson, challenging men to quick-draw contests in exchange for a gun that made by the devil himself. Before he was shot dead, Mark was one of the slowest, saddest guns around. Now he's killing challengers left and right. I ain't never heard of a man's aim improving after he died. Damn peculiar.
This was actually the last pitch I wrote. I had a few ideas for campaigns I might like to run, but I didn't feel like I had enough offerings. I like to give people 3 or 4 choices. And so I asked my wife if she had any suggestions. And she said, what about a Wild West town under attack by the Walking Dead, where people can't go out past the magic stones the sheriff has put out? Which was doubtless inspired by something I'd pitched to her a few years ago that we didn't actually use. Well, I ran with it, and I wrote that prompt. And my players surprised me because I wasn't aware that any of them were particularly interested in Westerns. But it was by a landslide the one that they voted for the most. And they also agreed that there were a couple of players they wouldn't mind having rejoin us. And so I formed a new group of 3 of my old players and 1 new player, plus a few other guys who have standing invitations, to explore Wonkatonkwa County, my newly imagined Weird West setting. And now the heat was on. I'd never played a Western role-playing game before, except for a single session way back in the 90s of an improvised game. Spaghetti Westerns are my own guilty pleasure, and I'd recently taken to reading a lot of pulps, and so I had been reading the odd Western story. But this was something new. So I sat down, and I gorged myself on Gunsmoke, on a bunch of old Clint Eastwood movies, and a bunch of Western horrors that happened to be on Tubi at the time to give me inspiration. And I used every spare minute I had to write a brand new role-playing game system that would meet their preferred level of crunchiness, which is fairly light but with at least a few numbers to sink your teeth into and a little bit of character optimization possible. But simple and light enough that it could be adapted and changed at a moment's notice. I don't know how I managed to create what I managed to create, but by the time I sat down with them a week later, on September 2nd, 2024, I had enough of a role-playing game for them to generate characters. In fact, one of my keenest players came with 2 already rolled up, and we ended up with a pretty interesting crew. There's May, a con artist and snake oil salesman. She learned actual medicine but then found the work was too much for her, and instead took to selling tonics, and learning a little bit of folk medicine and Native American shamanism to make her practice seem more appealing. May has no idea what she has done in the last couple of years, but she has a picture of a recently assassinated politician in her bag with an X through it, and a bundle of cash she has no idea how she made. I'm particularly proud of how that worked out. You see, I took some inspiration from Maze Rats, a role-playing game by Ben Milton. Player characters roll 1d6 on 6 different tables to determine their starting gear, or they can choose to pick and choose to suit their character build. But if you go with random rolls, you then have a choice. Start with about 3 times as much money as a player character whose gear was chosen, or take the numbers you just rolled, total them up, and check on a random treasure table, most of the entries of which not only give your character some unique and interesting piece of gear, but suggest something of a strange, dark, or sinister doing in their recent past. And then there's Patrick, a gunslinger recently fled from Ireland to America, looking for a new place to be free of the conflict between the Whitefoot Society and the Blackfoots. He's a deadeye with a pistol and really fond of trick shots. But the last thing he remembers was landing in the United States and planning to go west. He didn't expect to get this far away from home. Next up is Matthew, a fur trapper and hunter from the mountains of North Carolina who became a sharpshooter in the service of the Union Army. The last thing he clearly remembers is being told the war was over and he could go home, collecting what little pay he had coming to him, and then turning east to return to his kin. And they are joined by Shane, a female ordained Protestant priest from Ireland, a woman who has been haunted her whole life by terrible visions and nightmares, and who has turned to God and then to the occult in hopes of freeing herself from the strange events that keep plaguing her. Character generation went pretty smoothly. The biggest hitch was that my players were just too nice to each other. They kept trying to make sure that they weren't taking a skill, ability, or specialization that other players were going to take. And if that was the biggest hitch I ran into at first, well, that's a pretty solid start. Character generation was done and dusted within 40 minutes, even with the players trying to out-nice each other. And so we decided we were going to run a combat with these characters just to test them out, nothing that would be canonical to the campaign. And so I grabbed the plans for a 2-room adobe house. I put 1 bandit outside by the front door standing guard, and 1 in a little shelter taking care of some horses that they had been using. I also put 3 bandits inside, and gave them slightly different equipment loadouts. 1 shotgunner, 1 rifle shooter, 1 guy with a pistol and a few sticks of dynamite. Then I told my players that the goal was to take these guys out, dead or alive. The approach was uphill but had cover of scrub and cacti, and there was a low cobblestone wall surrounding the compound. The whole group of them snuck up and took cover behind the wall, managing to avoid the notice of the sentry. Once in position, Patrick and Matt carefully timed their attacks. Patrick, being a gunslinger with a pair of Remington Mark IIs on his belt, drew and shot the first bandit, The other one didn't even have time to turn around before he got shot in the back with a Sharp's rifle, which panicked the horses. Not wanting to lose those valuable animals, May made a beeline for the horses in hopes that she might be able to catch them and bring them back. Meanwhile, Shane began to seethe, shake, chant, and pray to call up a spirit of the desert to help them. Now, the remaining bandits definitely knew the player characters were there, but 3 of the 5 characters were built with some speed in mind and able to act before the bad guys did. Patrick took partial cover and waited for the inevitable return fire with his guns at the ready, while Matt broke hard right to give May some cover and hit them if they came around the side of the building. They didn't have long to wait. Meanwhile, Shane could feel the spirits of the desert respond to her, and she asked them to take control of the horses. A fortunate roll allowed the spirit to possess one of the horses running away from the compound and bring it swinging back around. 2 of the bandits came rushing to the window while the 3rd headed out the back door. Unfortunately, despite cover, Patrick took a bullet to the gut. In Undeadwood, a player character or lost soul doesn't have hit points. Instead, they have slots. Those slots are filled with the traits that give them their character abilities, and there are some blank ones that can be filled either temporarily or permanently with new items. Some of the traits you can rack up are called injuries, and if every one of your slots is filled with an injury trait, your character is dead. Injuries aren't just wounds, but they can be stun, they can be hunger, they can be heat exposure, meaning that all kinds of things can kill or weaken a player character. NPCs aren't as complicated. They have a simple number of wounds they can take, usually between 1 and 10 depending on how powerful they are, and weapons do anywhere from 1 to 5 damage. But when a player character gets hit by an enemy NPC, they have a number of D3s that are rolled for damage. Even a basic desperado like these guys do a D3 of damage. And Patrick rolled very unluckily indeed, filling up half his slots right away from a single grazing gunshot wound. Each one of those adding a cumulative -1 penalty to all of his rolls. With the enemy under cover, him being wounded, and the situation becoming quite confusing, Patrick did not manage to hit his enemy on return fire. And the very sight of Matt caused the guy breaking out of the back to take cover before he got shot at. May, meanwhile, took advantage of the fact that the horses were confused when one stallion had stopped moving thanks to the spiritual possession. He rushed over, leapt on another horse, and grabbed hold of its mane, fighting it as it bucked and kicked, until it calmed down and let her be the boss. Matt quickly used his rifle to dispatch one of the 2 bandits lurking in the window. Patrick, more interested in taking total cover than shooting, fired off a couple of rounds that didn't hit, and then started rummaging through his war bag for some dynamite. The bandit took a few cautious shots and ducked down with the exact same idea, and so began lighting a fuse of his own. Meanwhile, Shane, in her trance, could see through the horse's eyes, feel its muscles, and began turning it around and running it up the hill. She was able to shout a warning about the man behind the building as she charged her horse in its general direction. The threat of getting shot by Matt kept the bandit at the back wary, hoping he could get him to expend all of his ammo before he advanced. While May began wrangling up the other horses, knowing that each one of them would be worth a small fortune back at Hodang Gulch. This is when Patrick wound up and flung a stick of dynamite towards the window and found that he missed. It landed dangerously close, or it would have, if he didn't ask me if he couldn't use his trick shot ability to scoot the dynamite through the window in mid-fall. I had in fact put a trait specifically into the game to allow a character to pull off these sort of things. And so I said he could try, but that under normal circumstances his character would need to roll at least an 11 to do it. Even with his wounds, with the way the character was built, he could still pull it off if he could roll 10 on 2 6-sided dice. And luck was on his side. He managed to send that dynamite with a crack shot strafing through the air into the window to explode where a man was already holding loaded dynamite on him and had a belt full of it. The adobe cottage exploded in a shower of brick and debris. The final bandit staggered forward, his ears ringing, stunned, his clothing on fire, right into the path of the onrushing, possessed horse, which trampled him handily. The players celebrated their victory as May, equally victorious, came back with 5 fine horses that could be sold for over $200 back at the Gulch. In fact, the players were so proud of how it went, they debated whether or not to make it canon after all, and encouraged me to start the next game in media res to explain how they got to the cottage in the first place.
Alright, folks, that's it. Time to move along. What, you want to hear a few things? Well, let old Jeb inform you. This here was narrated by Brian C. Rideout. It is about his role-playing game, Undeadwood, the Weird West RPG. It's narrated by him, and the music was all created using the Suno AI by him. The sound effects have all been downloaded from Pixabay.com. And all the sound mastering, editing, and that handy stuff was done by Stormhead Productions. If you really need to hear more, use that there Twitter contraption to contact at BrianRideout7 or email lonesome.cowboy.brian@stormheadproductions.ca. That's it. Thanks a lot. Y'all keep your spurs on, here? Okay. One-handed poker. But I need someone to be my hands.